Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about Disney's handling of their franchises, such as Star Wars, and others as well though, and how that shows what a difference there is in the company today, all the way back to certainly when Walt Disney founded and before his death when he was still running the company, but even the big difference between what it is today and just what it was when I was growing up. I'm 40 years old now, and I've said this before in videos. I truly do love what Disney used to be and what it was when I found it growing up, what it has been for the vast majority of the company's existence. Disney was really my first, I have to credit that for my first exposure to fairy tales. And of course, as you know, if you watch my channel for any length of time, I've built my academic career on cultural mythology and how these stories, how fairy tales, mythologies, superheroes, comic books, how they affect and drive and direct us individually, psychologically, as well as our society, culturally. So it's a big deal, the hero's journey and all of this. And it all started with fairy tales. And my exposure to fairy tales was initially from Disney. Now, you hear a lot of grumpy, cynical people basically trying to sound cool and say, oh, they roll their eyes. Disney watered down and it just made their vanilla little versions of these fairy tales. That is one of the most ignorant statements anybody can ever make. If anybody ever tells you that, you can just immediately make some calculations about their intelligence right then and there. Grimm's fairy tales, wonderful Grimm's fairy tales is usually the canon they would point to. The Brothers Grimm, they watered down and made vanilla, if you want to use that terminology, the fairy tales they heard before they wrote them in this compilation. Now, they did a wonderful job. Let me say what they did first. They're very violent, very violent. Certainly Disney took that out. But the Grimm brothers themselves took out a bunch of the sects. They were Protestant Christians at the time, very, I'm forgetting, were they Huguenots? They were very puritanical in their specific Protestant belief. So they took out all of the sects that they could. Now, it's still tucked in there in the subconscious ways and whatnot, and you can read Bruno Bettelheim for some great examples of that and so forth. But they left the violence in, and people think, oh, they're avant-garde, they're edgy for the violence or whatever. Well, they themselves edited the stories and took out what they wanted to, and that still doesn't mean that there's any... you would look at their versions of the tales as a lesser in any way, because they provided their own lens, their own laser focus on the tales, on these fairy tales, and created a great thing. They didn't write them, but they compiled them, edited them, and produced them somewhat in their compilation. So that's great. Disney did the exact same thing. Disney brought his own charm in that uniquely American, sort of wholesome Midwest kind of, that's what Disney brought to that. And it's a wonderful thing. He just brought this wonderful charm to these stories. And my daughter has all of the princess stories with her right now over at her mother's. But I just grabbed a few of them that I have here still. And all of these great tales that the Disney and the company put its own sort of Disney charm and spin on down through the years, all the way down to actual mythology, like when eventually made it to Hercules, Greek mythology and so forth. So Disney has always been wonderful, but Disney had a guiding process, a guiding hand, a guiding lens long after Walt died. And it was what Walt really imbued the company with. And that's what I want to talk about here. I was watching recently this film called Saving Banks, came out a few years ago. And it was always on my watch list, but I just never got around to watching it. It's the story of the kind of famous struggle that Walt Disney had trying to get P.L. Travers to sign over the rights to Mary Poppins for him to make the film, which just became, arguably one of Disney's, biggest, most beloved classics in the day. And it's a wonderful story. This film was actually really well done. Of course, Emma Thompson, Tom Hanks did a great job in it, as well as the rest of the cast. But it did a good job of really trying to show forth the truth of that struggle, but also shaping it and adding it and putting that charm on it to make an enjoyable story to listen to as well. And there's some things that the movie has Walt Disney saying to P.L. Travers. Now, I haven't done all the historical research. Walt Disney's one of my heroes. I am about to crack into a big biography of him. So I don't know if these lines of his in the movie might have been taken from direct quotes he might have written or said elsewhere in his life, but I know that the sentiment there, this is the sentiment of Disney that I've heard interviews or heard statements or whatever. This is the sentiment. So there's a couple of lines when he first meets P.L. Travers in the movie, and he tells her, and he's trying to tell her, assuage her fears and whatnot. And I love this line. He says, "The last thing I would do, the very last thing, is tarnish a story I have cherished. Now the pages of your books are worn to tissue. They are dog-eared and fallen out because I have pored over them, gripped and tormented, because I love her, Pam. I love Mary Poppins. What does that say? That you come from a company here that would make adaptations or make further incarnations or whatever of a franchise because the man loved the story and wanted to see it on screen. Obviously, that's a different case from back when Walt was making Mary Poppins to say when Disney is acquired from Lucasfilm and is making Star Wars movies and so forth now. But this principle, this idea of wanting to make an incarnation of the story because of a great love for it, that's what I want to get at here. That was what Walt brought to the company and founded it on, and for a long period of time the company continued in, more or less. There's also a principle of storytelling that Walt Disney truly understood. And there's a wonderful scene at the end of this movie. I highly recommend anybody watch this movie. It's really great. It's a lot more profound, a lot more emotional than you might think, but it was really great. And there's a scene at the end when Walt is telling her of a story of his own past and his own, his father making them work in the winter, delivering papers and whatnot. And it's a pretty kind of a sad story. But he tells her, he says, I don't tell you this to make you sad. He said, I love my life. And, my father was a great guy. He said, but rare is the day that I don't think about that little 8-year-old boy out there in the snow being forced to go and deliver this, that. And he says, I'm so tired of remembering it like that. Don't you want to remember your past differently? And he's getting at the idea, which from if you've seen just the trailers of the film, Mr. Banks in the film is kind of based on P.L. Travers' father there. But he talks, and he says, he promises her if she gives him the rights to Mary Poppins, he says that audiences everywhere across the world, they will cheer and root for Mr. Banks. They will cry at his sorrows and so forth, and they will rejoice with him, and he will be saved. He says everybody everywhere will see Mr. Banks saved on that screen. He says because that's what storytellers do. They restore order with imagination. We instill hope again and again and again. He says that he'll be saved in imagination, not in real life, but in imagination, because that's what storytellers do. They instill hope again and again and again. And that's, thank you. That's what storytellers do. That's what the art of the hero's journey, the art of the story is. Not for every type of story. If you're writing a tragedy or something like that, then your deal is to provide catharsis, of course. But if you're talking about stories of epic scope that have to do with the hero's journey, if you're talking about Star Wars, my goodness, you inspire hope, or get out. You hear that, Rian Johnson? Get the hell out. Do not touch these properties anymore because you don't want to inspire hope. You just want to flip things around and make it weird and subvert and haha, I've made people mad. Now I'm a genius. Get help. Please get help. Kathleen Kennedy, she doesn't want to inspire hope. She just wants to get out a political agenda. Now that we have some people coming on to the Star Wars franchise, such as Jon Favreau apparently, and David Filoni's coming back and so forth. You got people that do know what it means to inspire hope and tell good stories and whatnot, and that's great. But we can't let the foundation, as I've said before, we can't let the continuity, the sequel trilogy, it cannot stand. And this is the point I'm going to end on, because this is what I've talked about in other videos. We cannot let this continuity stand. Everywhere articles are writing about now that the Skywalker saga is wrapped up with the rise of Skywalker. No, it's not. No, it's not. This is the first portion of the sequel trilogy. This is the only sequel trilogy, the Thrawn trilogy from the expanded universe. This is the only further stories of Star Wars we have that loves the original trilogy, that stays true to the spirit of it. And then after the Thrawn trilogy, on into the comics and so forth. This is a glorious thing, this expanded universe that Disney has rebranded Legends and tried to toss off to the side. This is what we still have. This is the only hope. This is the only Star Wars we still have beyond the films that remains true to the spirit. So I've talked about this a lot, and if you caught some of my recent videos, perhaps you've caught the announcement, but I am going to be leading a book study of the Thrawn trilogy. We're going to work our way out through all three, but we're going to start with Heir to the Empire. And this is the first one that was released early 90s-ish, I think, there. You know me, I'm bad with numbers. But I have my copy signed by Timothy Zahn, too. I'm very excited about that. It's really cool. So we're going to start with the first two chapters on January 9th, I believe. I'll have I'll check on that date and have it put in the comment section below. But we're going to go ahead and get through this first book, Heir to an Empire, and then we're going to move into the next next two as well, we're going to go through the trilogy, and this is something that I would like to do. I mean, I've done reviews of some of the expanded universe before. I'm not incredibly well versed in it. Others are far more expert to it than I. Edward, who's on the channel a lot, another guy, Dave Wilkins, I think his name is. I've been watching his channel a lot. Hope to have him on with me and stuff. But yeah, we're going to be making our way and just really celebrating this wonderful gift that we have, that a place that you can still go and experience Star Wars. So you can still, you're not stuck with what Disney is doing to the franchise. You know, even for those who want to, you know, keep the Mandalorian or whatever, that's fine. You know, that's, you know, another topic, another discussion or whatever. But you've got more out there. You've got further adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia, and Lando, and Chewie, and C-3PO, and R2-D2 that aren't deconstructed, that aren't downturns, that aren't, you know, sad endings. That, you know, these are still, they're still out being heroes. They're still out being wonderful Jedi Knights and scoundrel pilots of the Millennial Falcon and so forth that you would expect. This book itself opens with Luke, you know, continuing. He's very much the continuity that he takes off of from Return of the Jedi. This takes place about 5 years after Return of the Jedi, I believe. Han and Leia are married at this point. She's pregnant, and this is all stuff you find out in the very beginning of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything. But it takes place exactly, picks up the way you would expect it to after watching the original trilogy. It's brilliant. So this Saturday, no, not this Saturday. Next, I don't know. I'll put it in the description below. You know me, I'm bad in numbers. But we are going to watch do a rewatch on the channel of Return of the Jedi, because that's the one Star Wars original trilogy movie we haven't yet done a rewatch of. So we'll do that on the channel here. The date is in the description below, but we're going to do that the Saturday night before we actually start the book study. So grab yourself a copy of Heir to an Empire, read the first 2 chapters, and please do join us for that book study. We're going to have a blast and really just kind of celebrate the true sequel trilogy and the true spirit of Star Wars and the wonderful storytelling that is still capable even now if they ever let the Legends or expanded universe continue. But that's what we'll be doing together. So that's all for now. I'll come back with more info and commentary and streams and whatnot soon. But until then, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the stories you love. Thanks for watching.